Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on how to prepare construction sites for Tuesday's return to operations under COVID-19 Level 3. My name is Malcolm Flynn, Chief Executive of the NZIOB. Today's webinar has proven popular with 380 registrations. The Prime Minister's announcement on Monday that the COVID-19 alert level is being dropped to Level 3 is very positive news for the country and for the industry. This past 4 weeks has been very difficult, but the sense is that the lockdown has achieved what it set out to do, allowing us to emerge from lockdown safely, restart the economy. Construction has been very fortunate, in my view, to have had 2 entities in place when COVID-19 arrived. The first of those is the Construction Sector Accord, a group comprised of construction industry leaders and government agency CEOs whose collaborative response has been to put in place measures to assist the industry both survives the Level 4 lockdown and restart strongly. The second is Construction Health and Safety New Zealand, CHASNZ, whose CEO joins us for today's webinar. CHASNZ has been tasked by the Construction Sector Accord to produce a construction standard for working at COVID-19 Level 4 and with working collaboratively with key industry stakeholders to produce the underpinning protocols that industry will need to follow on their sites during COVID-19 Level 3. The development of those protocols has been a collaborative effort. I would like to acknowledge SiteSafe, master builders and civil contractors who worked with CHASNZ on the construction protocols. And this is the document that applies to commercial and infrastructure projects. There was a separate protocol for residential also, which involved inputs from a wider group, CHASNZ, SiteSafe and master builders, which joined by certified builders, specialist trades and Building Industry Federation. The documents that those groups produced has meant that construction is better placed than most to restart quickly and safely. Today's webinar is broken down to 2 components, an overview of the standard and protocols, followed by some practical advice from construction practitioners who've already been involved in a project in which they have been following COVID-19 health and safety requirements. Being an NZIOB event, it was important for us that the presentation included a main contractor and a consultant so as to be relevant to the widest range of members as possible. Therefore, we're very pleased that Tom Pyatt of Naylor and Mike Jeffery of RCP will take us through the way in which they manage their essential services projects in Christchurch over this last 4-week COVID-19 lockdown period. Before I hand over to Chris, I would like to make you aware that we'll be running 2 COVID-19 themed webinars over the next week. This Friday, we'll be running the second contracts webinar with Janine Stewart and Stephen Price from Minter Alderson, Rudd Watts. This second webinar is titled Review and Mobilisation. And next Wednesday, we'll be running our third Wellbeing webinar, which sees Dr. Kyle McWilliams return with a webinar titled Back to Site, though not back to normal. The webinar occurs the day after construction sites reopen. So we'll be sending registrants of that webinar a 45-second survey the night before, inviting them to share the key issues that they faced on day 1 under Level 3. That feedback will inform the material that Kyle covers in the webinar. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the support of JIB, the NZIOB's national partner, with whose assistance we have been able to deliver today's event. So please enjoy today's webinar. Please ask questions via the platform tools. I return after the 2 presentations to present those questions to Chris, Tom and Mike.
Thanks, Malcolm. So Chris Alderson here from CHASNZ. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. Maybe my panelist just gives me a thumbs up. It's all good. Yep, thanks Tom. Thanks Mike. Yeah, so who CHASNZ are, basically we're a charitable trust that was set up around about 2 years ago on behalf of the industry. So we had a previous incarnation as the Construction Safety Council, but around about 2 years ago the organisation was reformed into a charitable trust, and we have board members that cover right across the industry. They cover the vertical sector, the horizontal sector, residential. Brett Murray from SiteSafe is on our board from the training. industry, and we also have client representation as well as government. Phil Parks from WorkSafe sits on our board, and we have the unions there as well with etu. So what we are essentially is, as I said before, we're a not-for-profit, but we're also a non-government organisation, so we're an NGO. We sit between the industry and the regulator, or the regulators, if you include ACC in that as well, and MB. And we do a lot of lobbying on the industry's behalf around health and safety. We also do a lot of projects on the industry's behalf as well, collaboratively with the likes of the organisations that Malcolm has talked about before and the wider industry. So I guess the first message is we're here for you. And as part of that, as Malcolm said, we had the advantage of the construction sector accord that was set up between industry and government around about 6 months ago, which of course was working on a lot of wider issues to do with contracts, risk allocation, some of the things that we thought weren't working so well in the industry. So we had a direct channel through to government through that mechanism. When COVID-19 came onto the radar, most of the work for the construction sector accord switched into I guess emergency mode around COVID-19, and there was a body of work that was kicked off to say, okay, look, we know we're in furlough for at least 4 weeks now, let's get our ducks in a row to actually get the industry started in the best case possible and get a position to government that we believe should be followed, and get that endorsed by government so we'll be ready to go when lockdown comes out. So that was the high level sort of ask, and in doing that, you know, we've really had to come together as an industry. Malcolm mentioned some of the key organisations that were involved in that. We also had a lot of individuals from right across the industry giving us their time and efforts to develop some stuff for the industry to follow, as well as worrying about their own businesses. So this was all, as you can imagine, done, you know, after hours and with a lot of extra effort. So I'd just like to acknowledge not only those organisations, but the individuals. I won't go through them all, but they know who they are, that have helped us and continue to help us with this problem that we're working through. So look, as what I thought I'd do is just take you through some of the high level stuff and maybe talk on some of the pressure points we're seeing already. I'm just going to share my screen first of all, and hopefully you can all see there's a little graphic that's come up. And this graphic here is in one of the front pages of what we're calling the COVID-19 standard for New Zealand construction operations. So the first thing we did was say, look, we need a high level principles document and minimum requirements that the government's going to be happy with, that will give us the thumbs up and they can endorse that we can actually go to work, back to work safely. So this document is it. It's basically a standard. It's not an Australian New Zealand standard in terms of that kind of standard, because if you know anything about those standards, they take 6 months to a year to get through. So what we're calling it is an industry standard, i.e. that it's been consulted on through industry and it has been endorsed by WorkSafe. So WorkSafe see this document as one of the regulatory tests of what's reasonably practicable for organisations in the construction industry or what they need to achieve. So that was really important because, as I'm sure you know, while WorkSafe won't be out there auditing every site, yeah, there is the possibility that they will be doing spot audits based on the requirements in this document to the best of their capability. So that's the role of the regulator, and they will be referring to this document. So this document, being a standard, covers the what. It's essentially what you need to achieve. And it is quite high level, and it is principles based. It's a document that we don't expect yourselves at the operating level to be referring to every day. That's more the protocols, which I'll come to. But it's this document that when things seem a little bit unclear or we haven't thought of something, we go back to this standard to look at the principles involved, and then we make a call from that. So it does refer back to Ministry of Health and a lot of the requirements in there as well, but it is our overarching sort of guidance document in terms of what needs to be achieved. Sitting below the standard, the real meaty stuff, which is the protocols. And this is the work that the industries come together to develop. So the protocols cover the how. So how can businesses organise themselves to achieve the requirements of the standard. So it's a lot more practical, and we'd expect that if you're going to spend some time going through these documents, start with the protocols and really just trust that they are aligned to the standard. If you do find there's a few questions to be answered, then perhaps go back and look at the standard and see what the overarching principle is that we're trying to achieve. So in an ideal world, perhaps we would have had one construction protocol right across the industry, but we came to the realisation that the industry is a complex industry, and that we probably needed to reflect that there's a bit of variation to how organisations or parts of the industry might be able to achieve this. And that main separation came from really, I guess you'd call it more the big end of town, vertical commercial sites and civil sites felt that they could actually build a combined protocol for larger organisations. And then the residential sector, where they don't have quite the ways and the means that some of the larger projects or larger organisations do, felt we needed a more nuanced document that better reflected SMEs and residential sites. So there are two documents, and I'll show you in a minute where you can find all these documents, because I know there's been a few questions about that as well. These documents are designed as look what's the way that you will be able to actually achieve the requirements of the standard. Below the construction protocols is where it comes down to you. We expect that businesses and sites will need their own plans, and these should be reflective of those construction protocols. So I know that WorkSafe on their website, they've come out with some material in the last couple of days, and one of their key requirements is to build a COVID-19 plan. They've got a good template on there, a very simple one that you might want to look at. There's, as part of the horizontal and vertical protocols, we've actually got some more, but there's actually some site-specific safety plan sort of templates on there as well, that if you actually wanted to go down that path as well. So look, the WorkSafe material is absolutely in line with our standard and protocols. It does reflect and refer to industry guidance, which is the stuff here. So don't worry about so much about whether this is in line with WorkSafe's requirements. It absolutely is, and it's been endorsed by WorkSafe. So business and site plans. There's been a little bit of talk about, and I think this came from a Prime Minister's comment, I think last Thursday, about self-certification or registration. I can confirm that that's not the case for the construction industry. We don't need to do a self-certification or any kind of registration for this. The requirement's actually quite simple, which is, look, have your plan well communicated, with your team and how you've actually built it up. And if you're asked about it, be prepared to show somebody, i.e. the regulator, if it comes to it. So there are no more requirements from us, from MB or from government other than that. So look, that's where the standard sits. I'm just going to flick through to the protocols, and I think I'll start here with the vertical and horizontal construction protocol. You'll see it says version 2 on it. One of the things we've also realised is that although the standard won't change, the protocols may need updating from time to time. And the reason for this is, look, this way we're actually dealing with this virus is changing for a start. We're seeing different approaches almost on a daily basis worldwide, and that is filtering through to the way we work. The other thing we're finding as well is that as we get to know how this is being applied by people like Tom, by people like Mike out in the field, we're going to know that parts of the document are well understood, some others might be a little bit more difficult, they need clarification, and there could be some minor tweaks and changes that we need to do over the coming weeks. We obviously resist, if possible, changing the document because we understand that it creates uncertainty and complexity. However, as things do change, if it's important, we do actually need to make those changes. And you'll see at the beginning of the documents, there's actually a version note actually showing what the amendments have been. So you can actually go through and track to see, you don't need to read the whole document, you can just go to the front of it and say, oh, well, that's changed as well. So what I thought I'd do is go through just the high level structure of these documents and maybe talk about some of the issues and things that we've considered through it. So both protocols and the standard all follow the same sort of 5-step flow. So we've tried to keep them really consistent there. So whether you go into the residential protocol or this protocol, you'll see that they'll follow the flow of before arriving on site, what you need to do, site entry when you're letting people on site, the operations throughout the day, leaving site, and then some management protocols around what do you do if you're in an emergency situation, and that's why it's in the pink on the side there. So that flow, we think, works for most businesses. It's quite easy to understand, and that flow is also being picked up across other industries as well, as a really good way of just communicating at a fairly simple, pragmatic level. How your daily operations will work. So you'll see as well that this is for alert level 3. We're having a look at the moment about whether there are any changes for alert level 2, and there could be another document in a couple of weeks if we do, or an amendment to this document for alert level 2. Having said that, we have had these documents reviewed also by the University of Auckland School of Public Health. Their epidemiologists went through it, and their feeling at the moment is the requirements on a business like construction between level 3 and level 2 from a COVID-19 safety point of view won't be that different. So we'll still need to do most of these things. So the investments we put in now in getting this stuff done, I guess on the good side, aren't going to be wasted in the short term, but this thing could be with us for a while. What we do expect to see at level 2 is just more businesses being able to operate and operate safely. So this is all about operating safely. It's basically creating a consistent way of operating across the construction sector. It's also about giving confidence to our workers that we have something in place that they can come back to work and feel safe, that they're not actually going to be expose themselves unduly or exposing their families. We have talked to a lot of businesses that operated through level 4. There were a couple of construction sites that were deemed as essential services, and obviously primary industries and a lot of supermarkets, etc., have been operating through. They have reported quite a high level of absenteeism amongst the workforce, and a lot of that was based on fear. I guess we've got a range of people across construction that some people will be dying to get back to work, come what may, and at the other end of the spectrum we're going to have some very, very tentative people who are really wondering about particularly if you look at the media, what's going to happen. So I guess one of the overarching messages is, as Malcolm said, be kind and really communicate these protocols and give confidence to our workforce that they can come back to work safely. So again, I'll just run through this in the remaining sort of 10 or 12 minutes. Before arriving on site, look, one of the important things is we have been on furlough for about 4 weeks, and when we down tools, it wasn't in a structured way as perhaps we'd like. It's not like when we go away for Christmas for a couple of weeks. It has been a long time. So look, there is a bit of a check that we do expect organisations to be doing to make sure that their sites are still fit for purpose. And this isn't just so much COVID-19 related, it's just general health and safety. So, is your scaffolding still up to spec? Is everything where it was and where you wanted it to be before you left? If people still understand the tasks that they're going to complete, we're not actually going to create a whole spate of non-COVID related incidents, accidents, falls from height, that sort of thing, by charging back in there unstructuredly. So we do want people to plan for that and have a think about it. Inductions are important. So if you can get the message about this plan or your individual plans across to your workers, in a non-face-to-face environment before they turn up, I think that's a really good thing to do. If you can, and that also builds that confidence, of course, that we have got a plan. If you're thinking about how they're going to get to work, so obviously you don't want to create a whole lot of risk by sticking a whole lot of big guys in a in a minivan and driving them across town, and then get to site and then apply all these physical separation stuff, and you've kind of defeated the whole point. So you need to think about, particularly if they are work-related transport, you need to think about how you do that. And I think about, if there is any kind of PPE that you need in particular, and I'll come back to PPE in a minute, just think about where you're going to get that as well. So moving on to site entry, one of the things that's really, really important across this and across all industries is obviously contact tracing. So we need to know who is where, essentially. So whether you've got a lot of people who are sort of more mobile, so if you're in the trades and you're actually visiting residential homes, you need to track those people about where they've been and who they've been into contact with. And on your site, you need to know from a site perspective who's been visiting your site and who's on your site. If you can actually get to a finer level about, who's actually on your site in certain work areas, if you have got bubbles on site, that's actually good too. So that registration, look, we haven't mandated a product or an app or anything like that for doing this. Larger organisations probably have got some stuff already. There are some templates, sign in and sign out registers available on our website. And look, there are some apps available out there that can do it. If you do want to go down the app stage, my only advice there would be there's actually some free apps and you don't need to spend a lot of money to do this. The other thing I'd say as well is we're starting to see a few health and safety consultants helpfully offering to do your health and safety plans for $200 and $300. My advice would be have a look at the WorkSafe template, pull these protocols down, have a crack at it yourself. It's totally doable and totally understandable. You don't need to be, you don't have to have that kind of background to pull this stuff off, and it's not designed that way. So again, bit of signage. So this can be, there's some signage. I'm sure that's, it doesn't have to be professional signage, but look, at least have some reminders when people are walking on site what the requirements are, in particular around the hygiene. And as Malcolm said before, hygiene is really important. It's probably our number one defence in all this. We're not advocating, fancy temperature monitoring or that sort of stuff. You do need to understand before people come on site what their health status is. And obviously you need them to be aware of the fact that if they do start getting cold-like symptoms or a temperature, that they shouldn't come in and they should check with somebody. But what we've found is that things like temperature and thermometer type scanning, you can get a lot of false negatives. So COVID-19 can present with people that haven't got temperatures. And we don't want people to let down their guard around the hygiene stuff, which is the number one defence that we've got against this. So having your site configured where people understand that they're regularly sanitising their hands, all that stuff we've been taught over the last 4 weeks still applies on your site, and making sure that you've got the ability to sort of wipe down your surfaces and sort of soap and water, hand sanitizer if you got it, but soap and water is just as good as well. So the other one, going on to site operations, so physical distancing, and this has been a bit of a hot issue. So originally we thought that, and this has been a change in the protocols. So round about, I think it was Monday, no, it was last Thursday actually, the Prime Minister started talking about 2 metres in public, 1 metre at work. So that came through, and the reasoning behind it when we found out was that the World Health Organization had changed their view down to 1 metre. And we, when we inquired about it, they said, look, in 2 metres, when you've got members of the public out there, very hard to contact trace. If you're in the workplace or you're in a school or an education facility, you know who's there. If something does get in there, we can actually contact trace people. So that's been the difference between able to release from the 2 metre minimum down to the 1 metre minimum. WorkSafe subsequently came out with their position on it, which we had to amend in the protocols and fall into line with, which was 1 metre is the minimum. So you can't go below 1 metre. And if it's reasonably practicable to do so, please stick at 2 metres. So there's a look, please, like, if you're in lunchrooms and things like that, you can actually organise your team into 2 metres, still do it. If you can't do that, then down to 1 metre is allowable. So below 1 metre is not allowable. That's a hard limit. So look, COVID level 3 is not business as usual. It is, as I sort of was talking to the guys before, it feels like limp home mode when your car sort of doesn't work so well. So it's not BAU. and there are some restrictions, particularly if you think about, how you're going to transport people. If you've got a very big vehicle, yeah, there'll be a metre apart, but if you've got 4 guys in a Toyota Corolla, yeah, they won't be. The other thing I guess might be worth mentioning here is, it's been a hot topic, has been PPE. So we have seen early on some sites planning to just about have people in hazmat suits and a whole lot of stuff, which I think is not our advice. So the advice in the protocols really talks about the fact that the PPE is just your normal PPE. Okay, and there's reasons for this, is where masks and gloves have been recommended, particularly by organisations like the World Health Organization. It's been in a very different context than New Zealand's in. So those have been in societies and environments and countries where we've had widespread community transmission. So at the moment, they're talking about everyone wearing masks in New York subways, everyone wearing masks in London. So the theory behind that is, look, if you are symptomatic, and they have got a lot of symptomatic people out there, wearing a mask might stop the droplets spreading everywhere. Masks haven't been proven to be effective in the general population to actually stop you getting COVID-19 though. And the reason for that is the mask type for a start needs to be like an N95 or a very high grade mask, which needs to be professionally fitted. You need some training, and even then, as we've seen in the medical environment, you can still actually get COVID-19. So there's no way that sticking cloth masks on people on your work sites is actually going to protect them from COVID-19 if we haven't got widespread community transmission. Last reason is, the last thing we need is for the whole construction industry to charge out, put a whole lot of pressure on the stocks of PPE that the people who really need them are relying on, which is our health service. So they come first in this. So look, that's the advice there. It's consistent with Ministry of Health, but it's also a good thing to explain, to your workers about why you might not be wearing masks if you're not normally wearing masks for the work that you're doing before COVID. Obviously, gloves are another issue as well, like just wearing, as you all know, like wearing different types of gloves. The gloves are purpose built for the task, and that actually wearing a rubber or a latex glove could actually create a lot more risk than you're actually trying to solve. So again, the overarching control in all this is hygiene and good hygiene and physical separation. Site cleaning, leaving site, it's also really important to just give people a bit of confidence that, if they're coming home and with that there is some decontamination they might need to do. It's kind of a belt and braces thing. Supermarket workers have been doing it, other people operating at level 4. There's a really good guideline that we've put out, just a simple poster that shows what you need to do. You don't need to superheat all your PPE or anything like that. It's just soap again, soap and water, and like hanging your stuff out to dry on the line is a good idea as well, because that actually has got better sanitizing qualities than sticking it in a closed driver if you can. So that's the leaving site stuff. The management protocols really about, look, this is where it gets really serious. So if you do actually believe you've got somebody who's potentially symptomatic, you need to get onto the Ministry of Health straight away and follow their directions. And as you know, that stuff's pretty heavily mandated by the government at the moment. So what we're trying to achieve with these protocols is really showing people the main things that they can do to operate as a business, and give confidence back to the workforce that we can actually operate safely. What we don't want to have happen is, obviously, as the government's saying, is that we have, when we do go back to work, all of a sudden we see an increase in COVID-19. It would be particularly damaging if it came from a workplace. It would be even more damaging if it came from a construction workplace, because the feeling at the moment is we'd be back to level 4 pretty quick. Almost instantly with very little notice if that did happen. So again, the overall program in New Zealand is about uniting. We know that compliance won't drive this, because with the best will in the world, WorkSafe have got limited capability around compliance. It is around leadership for the industry and making sure that we all do the right thing. I guess the last thing I was just going to do before I hand over to my colleagues is just show you where this stuff is available. So I'll just share here. So if you haven't been on here before, some of you will have been on the CHASNZ website, chasnz.org/COVID-19. There's a landing page for all this stuff. If you flick down through it, you'll see there's updates on there that we'll put up as soon as we know things. You can download the standard, and then the protocols are there as well, vertical and horizontal protocols, residential construction protocols. We're also collecting any tools and resources that from the likes of industry that we feel that they're happy to donate and share wider. So we're a great place to actually put all that stuff. So there's some good stuff on there, posters, other materials. On the left-hand side here as well, if there's a lot of questions, there are organisations that are set up to actually help you through this. So we've got SiteSafe, registered master builders, master plumbers, New Zealand certified builders, civil contractors, and ourselves at CHASNZ. So there's some numbers and some emails there. So don't hesitate if there are questions and you want someone to actually walk through some of the stuff with you. There's some support, and I'm sure that other associations will be doing the same thing. Just like a shout out as well, we actually have got a lot of work that's been done by our sister organisation, which is Mates in Construction. I'm also the chair of Mates in Construction, and I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at, you can use the tab from our website. It'll drive you straight to their website. What they've done is built a whole induction pack around mental health, about what to talk to your workers about, and how to deal with some of the mental health issues we might be seeing. We know construction's already got a pretty, it's pretty difficult from a mental health point of view in the best of times, and we've got the highest suicide rate across all industry. So it's really important that you know, we do take a bit of time to consider what some of our business owners, you yourselves, and your teams might be going through. There is help there. There's a great 0800 number to work through, and you don't need to be part of the Mates family. Anyone can ring that up, and I just really promote that as a service too. So look, that was really my bit at the moment, Malcolm. I think I'll hand over now, and thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Mike Jeffery, RCP here. Your time, if you want to pull the slide up, that'd be great. I guess a little bit of background. So as a client-side project manager, we've been working in the level 4 lockdown on essential projects for a few weeks now. So we've been developing and testing and improving systems to allow works to proceed, and have been able to do that reasonably successfully. And kind of what I'm wanting to show you there is that over the period of the last sort of month, we've tried to articulate and try and tease out some of the key things that people need to know to help us test whether work can proceed and when it should and shouldn't. So what you're seeing in front of you is the best way we can describe a task and all the communication and all the work faces that need to interface with that in order to make that happen. And so the only thing that changes with all the different levels is simply the ability to communicate face to face. And also work in the same working bubble. So if we kind of work our way out, so you've kind of got your task, you'll have a worker, there'll be a level of training, there'll be a level of PPE and required by that worker. The next step out from that, you'll have the workface team, so there'll be a number of workers all coordinating with one another. And we've been working under the premise that that supervision of that work bubble is within the bubble. So there is probably a higher degree of knowledge within that bubble in order for those work tasks to take place. Outside of that, you have you'll have a number of work faces that you want to coordinate with, but the site supervision and coordination between those different supervisors is done remotely as much as possible. And then obviously your outside bubble, that is your wider project team. So that's your client, that's your engineers, your QSs, your project managers, everything, all the information and the council inspections or whatever in compliance required to do those works. So you'll see that I've kind of split it into 3 parts. So we've just talked about the different communication groups. The solid red line is the group that we've been working in under level 4 for essential works, which we believe is definitely manageable and has worked reasonably well and should apply to level 3. It will be on our projects. And then beyond that is the dotted line, which is the rest of the project team, which are actually adjusted quite well to working remotely and have some quite good remote protocols in place, with the exception that some people still need to enter that work bubble from a compliance point of view. We've had get engineers out to do some inspections and bits and pieces. So there's some protocols around creating opportunities for us to enter those workers' bubbles. But the priority is that you need to protect them. And the way that we've kind of done that is that we have our contractors, and in particular on what we're going to talk about today, Naylors, have provided quite detailed plans that we've worked through as a working group, so that we can understand all the people that need to be involved in order for a task to proceed. And if we can keep those pathways quite small and keep the group small and keep them isolated from one another, then that gives us a lot of confidence to allow those works to proceed. And that's worked pretty well. But equally, we've also had to be grown-ups about this, and we've had to accept that there's works that we've had to defer because of the risk that we might not be able to complete those works. We could start, but based on the number of dependencies on other skill sets or other workers, we would have probably not been able to complete those works, and therefore had to provide some sort of temporary securing and or taken down the wider workforce and not achieved anything. So pretty important that you kind of think about that and agree those things on a site-by-site basis as the advice is coming out. So it's a lot of work for us all as we work through it, but it has worked really, really well. And I'm going to hand over to Tom to talk in a bit more detail from the contractor's perspective about how they develop some of those plans and controls. And then we'll circle back around on some of the lessons learned that we've found out over the last few weeks. So I'll hand over to you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. So just go on to the next slide now. So we've done quite a bit of work under level 4, and essentially the main principles there, they're going to be much the same under level 3. So I think the key thing, if you're producing a management plan or producing any form of task planning documentation, is of course to remember what we're trying to achieve here. The main thing is keeping people safe on site, and we've got to consider the new concepts now. So this is physical distancing and bubbles, rigid hygiene processes, and of course contact tracing as well, which is one of the key ones. So we found the general public has a really good understanding of what they need to do. And we've found on sites that our trade teams that are coming out to site, also our contractors, our clients, even delivery drivers, everyone has a willingness to protect one another. But the main thing here is to change the behaviour on site so that people don't work as they normally would, because this is not, as Chris has said, business as usual. So one of the other things is to make sure that we're producing planning documentation in a chronological format, which Chris alluded to before. So make sure that you're spelling it out clearly for people so that they can trace it throughout their day. And remember that COVID-19 is a new risk, but the existing framework that we have in place for our sites is still very much relevant now. Another thing is to assign responsibility. So of course, with the new protocols, we have a number of unusual tasks, you might call them, so cleaning of door handles, diligently recording who's been on a site so that you can contact trace well afterwards, monitoring proximity, maintaining stocks of PPE. All of this can't get forgotten, so do make sure that someone's allocated that task, or a number of people have allocated those tasks, so that it's not missed. On our sites, for example, we've had a site manager who cleans door handles, and it's not an enjoyable task, but someone has to do it in this current environment. Another thing that we've used widely, it's been very effective, is the infographics and the CHASNZ documentation. So pull that out, because it's clearly articulated and it's attention grabbing, and place it around your site as you need to. And of course, updating the document to ensure that any changes are captured. And when you do update things, make sure that you're distributing that widely to your network of consultants, visitors, anyone that could come to site, so that they understand the new process. If you're creating separation on site, which is quite a tricky thing, and I see a number of the queries are regarding that, these are a few things to consider in our experience. So firstly, just think basically, what do you want to achieve on site, and what does your current program or your last plan or your look ahead schedule, even your role or your remit necessitate you doing usually. And the second part of that, of course, is working out where and who would be involved in undertaking a task. So the best thing to do is do a spatial assessment of the work site that you're working on. And it could be as simple as plotting 2 or 4 metre circles on paper with a compass, and not even that, just with a highlighter, and just working out exactly what sort of spatial requirements you have. And then, of course, think, what do you actually need to change to comply with level 3? So think about your access to site, your sequencing methodology, your timing. We all want to go back to the main principle here of avoiding that cross-pollination, making sure we're physically distancing and we're keeping to our bubbles. And remember that consultants as well, building inspectors, these kind of people need to consider how they would interact with a building site. So I would say to consultants, so I'd say to clients, I'd say to building inspectors, please convey how you would like to do things, or would suggest you would interact with sites back to main contractors, so that they're aware of what your expectations are too. It can be collaborative in terms of agreeing what that mechanism needs to be. And if you're visiting site, for the benefit of all people, make sure that there's an objective from the visit, so you know exactly what you're looking to achieve, and so that any visits can be as swift as possible. And then establishing, so I'll go back one there, establishing the and maintain the administrative control, so installing cones, barriers, bunting, fencing, dazzling marks on the ground, that kind of thing. That's critical so that you're actually enforcing your plan, and then monitor it to make sure that it's continuing to work. So just showing here a couple of examples of planning. Under level 4, the level 4 project, we worked on quite an open air site, so defining work areas was a little bit easier. Achieving the spatial requirements was much easier. What I've shown here in the central, the centre picture there is just a spatial assessment of a space, and I've plotted in 2 metre circles exactly where people could work. Now that's sort of a best case scenario, and on this particular site I would look to have 30 or 40 people, but do consider that the actual work plan is something like on the right there. So at any one time, that's how many people we could reasonably have in the building. And you'd see in areas like number 11, zone 11, that should be one trade there working alone, because it's quite an open area. So don't be perturbed by the fact that you've got reduced productivity. This is absolutely expected at a time like this. Our key focus here is safety of people, and speed at which we work is much less of a consideration. And some tasks will not be able to be done at all. That's absolutely expected in this current environment. So I've also shown here just a couple of examples of separation within facilities. So on the left there, we had some purpose-built and fairly simple timber and polythene enclosures for people to get changed. So from our trade team, we had feedback that they were keen to wear a different set of clothes to site and change on site into it for the work, and then change out of it afterwards. So that kind of stuff has real merit. And I suggest people listen to their trade teams, those undertaking the physical works, for what their expectations are and what they're comfortable with. Other thing is site officers, so we can observe separation on sites, but consider in site facilities as well the same considerations need to be in place. And repurposing of spaces as well. So the meeting room on the right would traditionally have 16 people around the table every Tuesday. Not the case anymore, of course. So that can be used as office space with separation observed. And finally, I'll chat just about compliance and worker engagement. So the key things that we need to maintain here. So if you are producing a management plan, one of the key things is distributing the documentation far and wide to all those that need to have it. Use your network to get your plan to the right people, so that anyone attending site doesn't compromise your diligent efforts due to lack of awareness. For example, if you said to your network, do not attend site unless it's, or attend site only by arrangement, you're immediately reducing the chance of unnecessary personnel being there. The next thing is to seek and act upon feedback when you're producing your plans. So this could be your overall management plan, a JSCA, a task analysis, SWIMS, that kind of thing. Seek advice on what's working well, what needs to be changed and to be improved. And feedback from those actually doing the work is critical in that situation, and that will increase your engagement with staff. Toolbox meetings are pre-start, our usual forums for conveying information. They're the best forums for that. Just make sure that if a change is made, you're communicating that back to people, and you communicate the effectiveness back to people so that they're aware of their input and how that's benefiting others. And similarly, contractors need to communicate their plans with consultants and clients and colleagues to pool ideas. Some of the best meetings and most productive meetings we've had recently have been with our clients and client representatives and consultants. So I really would encourage that, and it can be done over Teams or Zoom meetings such as this. Lead by example, don't deviate from the plan as well. Sorry, I'll click through there. And if leaders and supervisors are modelling compliant behaviour, that'll quickly form habits. So the level 3 protocols mean less productivity, which can be frustrating, but as soon as it becomes a habit and part of your workday, it's much more palatable. The next thing is to monitor compliance on site, provide reminders and coaching through forums like meetings. And I think it's important to remember the government's advice to be kind here. People are under all sorts of unusual pressures, so just be mindful that their mind may wander and they may not focus exactly on what they're doing. But if workers are negligent, similarly, you need to consider disciplinary processes. We don't want people on site who aren't actively keen to work under protocols, because they're a danger to themselves and a danger to others. And finally, I'll chat about signage as well. So we've seen on our sites, and we've seen workers forming habits really quickly and committing to all the new processes. So that's great to see, and I'm sure people will find that as well on their respective sites and in their workplaces. But just remember that you can put signage in a number of places if you need to, because that will reinforce your ideas. And it's a time of potential information overload for people. So just be mindful that people may need gentle reminders. So on the toilet door, for example, make sure that you put up signs just saying, hey, you're supposed to use a certain facility. Same with lunchrooms, that kind of thing. So there's a few tips from site. And we've found that it's achievable under level 4 to work and to comply with these processes, and it will be the same as level 3. But if we put in the effort now and convey our messages and distribute our plans out to people, we'll get widespread buy-in and engagement from the network. So I'll just push back to hand over to Mike there just to jump in about the lessons learned on sites that we've mutually worked on recently.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. So what sort of Tom's sort of suggesting there is that changing the habits of a lifetime is actually quite hard. So we are asking people to do things that they wouldn't normally do in terms of level of hygiene, but through repetition and coaching and supporting and gentle reminders, they are embracing it because it protects them, their friends, and their wider families. So just you do need to keep reminding them in a positive way. To ensure that they do change the habits, because it can be quite difficult. So just really briefly, the lessons learned stuff, what we've kind of found through a number of different work phases and different sites is that having an isolated work phase bubble is much more resilient than split shifts. So having one group of people working in an environment, only working in that environment, having nobody else going into that environment is obviously really, really resilient. Split shifts does work, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be, it'd be frowned upon at level 3. You're relying much more heavily on hygiene and other things when you swap the shifts over and stuff. But you just need to be mindful that we're looking for the most resilient model in order to try and build a strong foundation to start getting back towards BAU. It's not BAU, so it's really important to kind of think about those things. The second thing is to have a backup plan, because you will find you'll have key resources or key subcontractors that are typically small teams and really, really important to you being able to complete some tasks. And if for whatever reason, if they are showing symptoms and what have you, and there's another 15 people reliant on them in order for that task to take place, then you need to be ready and prepared to either stop that task or have an alternate plan in place in order to allow it to go forward. And that's, as I say, back to the third point, is that being prepared to reduce the number of tasks is difficult for all of us when we're also driven around programs and stuff. But we'll talk about a working example of that. So just get through this list of why that's really, really important. A key lesson learned for us. Testing, isolation, and tracing procedures. You just got to keep improving it, keep testing it, get it as efficient as you can, so that you can keep your exposure bubble as small as possible so that you can return to your workplace as quickly as possible whilst protecting everybody. So yeah, the monitoring for coming onto site, making sure they're healthy, keeping those groups really small is really, really important. And as Chris has said, there's a number of free apps and different things that are available, but I think the old days of the old manual sign-in book might be dead under a level 3 and level 2 type scenario. Too difficult to trace. The next thing is, as I say, keeping your supervision within your workplace bubbles. So these people are working in isolation. So you need to have teams that are well supported and well experienced in order to complete these things, because the ability to go and help them without entering their bubble is much harder. So just making sure that the skill sets within the group are there, and having that site supervision on that task within that group, and having those site supervisors communicating more remotely rather than all going into the meeting only to walk back into the 100 people that are working out on site and just destroying any protection that you've got in place. And then the last thing really is that this is all new, so you won't get it perfect the first time around. So you do need to update your monitoring of these controls to look at opportunities to further enhance them and improve response times and look at clever ways of doing things. And your team will help with that. So as Chris has said earlier, is that we'll see a few versions of documentation and guidelines come out, because we'll be testing it over the next few weeks and a bit more widely across the industry. So and that kind of leads sort of into the working example of why I'm suggesting those lessons learned. And that straight after lockdown into level 4, we all started reasonably ambitious in terms of we had essential projects, therefore had lots of essential work faces, and we got a lot of work faces up and running and put all the protocols in place and bits and pieces, but the bubbles were still quite big in terms of the number of people required to complete tasks, and there was some overlap. And what we found is that we had someone show symptoms the day after they were a part of one of those sort of coordination sessions, and that stopped a significant part of that site for 48 hours while everybody was isolated and tested, and that really had a big impact on confidence within the plan. And so what we ended up having to do is we further reduced the number of work faces to make sure that we didn't have a repeat of that, and that we were able to keep that bubble quite small. So anything more to add on that kind of that lesson learned, Tom?
Yeah, we looked at separating facilities as well there, so putting in I know there's limitations, especially on smaller sites. It's just not something you'd factor in, say having a site shed, for example, but if you do have facilities, make sure that you're not encouraging unnecessary congregation there. And it extends as well to emergency plans too. So consider if there was a fire, say in a building, where you would congregate. You can't just have everyone flood out and assemble in the car park, because you're undoing all your hard work there. So make sure you modify those kind of processes at the same time in conjunction with the COVID-19 stuff. But yeah, it's quite painful having to dismiss a huge number of workers when it can be avoidable just by reduced sizes of bubbles and numbers and working in zones. So think about that before you prioritise productivity. Think about what how difficult it would be to trace people if you've got a number of people working on a site.
Cool, thanks, Tom. Over to you, Malcolm.
Great, thanks, guys. That was very, very good. A couple of themes that came through on the questions. Before I go to that, one of the things that you mentioned, Tom, which resonated, is the comment about being realistic about productivity. It's going to take longer to do stuff. Productivity will drop. This phase, it's all about safety. Panelists have been answering those questions live. Some of the key ones that probably worthy of just tackling now also. For you, Chris, protocols other than languages and English. Now, we talked before coming on, you'd had very close to the Mandarin one. So How far away are you with that, and what other languages have you got?
Well, Mandarin for residential is happening today. So that'll go up. Look, it just takes time for people to work on this stuff. I think Filipino is a good idea, so we'll put that through the teams.
And another one that came up, was some talk about some free apps. And I'm aware that CHASNZ was doing some work on a free app, so this might be a good chance to throw that in. How close are you with yours?
Well, it's the Construct Safe app, so that app's been in the industry for a while. It's actually owned by the industry. It's through the NZ Construction Industry Council. So that is a free app. You don't need to have SAC Construct Safe to actually get hold of the app. You just go onto constructsafe.kiwi and you register as a business, and then your teams can download the app, and you can set up geofencing, and you can actually have people register in and out of sites. So I guess my view would be, look, it's an option. It's also a good option if there are commercial ones that you can pay for out there as well. But I'd have a look at that one because it is free and it's already owned by your industry.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions regarding limitation of people moving from site to site. The question pertained to trades, but it could equally apply to suppliers, of course. A response to that?
There's no limitation moving to site at the moment. I think there was another question there about, what about hygiene and that? Well, I think it's again common sense. Apply your hygiene before you go onto a site after you've left it. Washing your boots down might be a good idea if you've got the ability to do that as well. But there's no restriction on people moving site to site, other than if you don't have to be on site, please don't be on site. I think there was another question there from Mr. Anonymous, who's on fire at the moment, talking about somebody who usually just stays in his office.
Oh.
They need to be on site. So I think that's referring probably to another issue. But look, the overall instruction is, again, like in public, if you don't need to be at work, don't be at work. Let's limit the flow. It's just making it easier for the people who do have to be at work. If we've got all the, we don't want any construction tourism going on at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's right. Construction tourism, we talked about that earlier. A question that's come up a couple of times is regarding split shifts. And I know in your presentation, Tom, you covered this, and Mike touched on it as well. Probably for you, Tom, a number of industries do this, not outside of construction. What was the main reason that you didn't follow it with the Naylor projects?
Do you mean in terms of splitting shifts?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we actually are for some of our work. So my site plan that I showed earlier, we will be doing, we have 4 workers on site during night shift. So overall in the day, we'll be looking at 15 people, but down to, I think, any day 15 people, probably 8 during the day. In terms of why, I guess you have to look at your efficiency and your productivity and what your program necessitates, of course. But I think the main thing here is conveying back to all people, including clients, that the key focus here is on ensuring compliance with it at all times. So if you were doing night shifts, for example, consider, do you have the capability to document everyone that's attended site, that kind of thing. It's still important. And if you can't do that with night shifts and you're leaving tradespeople to work unattended, for example, consider whether it's actually practical in this environment.
Yeah. A question just came in about Portaloo protocols on residential sites.
So again, I guess it comes down to really just, look, we know the virus can sit on plastic for a while, and it's really about having the ability just to regularly clean them down and have the facilities there for people who are using those portaloos to be able to clean them down. So we realised that we still need them. So there's no ban or anything like that on portaloos. It's really just applying those hygiene requirements to them again. I mean, I don't know, Tom and Mike, practically, have you got any cases where you've had to use them?
We've got portaloos on some sites, and we're conscious of potentially a lot of people using those. So we've got plumb toilets on some sites, the luxury of plumb toilets, which we're using as a first up. We're actually closing our portaloos. But I guess on a residential site where you may have one toilet, as long as you're cleaning it somehow and reduce the number of people that are using it, then that should be absolutely fine.
That's great. Okay, we've got 1 minute to go. This one I can answer. Is the presentation available? Yes, it is. NZIOB members can just download it on their webs off our dashboards. Non-members, they've got access to it at a fee off the NZIOB website. So that concludes it. We've just come up to 60 minutes. Thank you very much to our presenters. I've had a comment here, very useful having somebody like Tom who's been there and worked on the site. So it's been very useful indeed. So thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation.
Thanks for having us, Malcolm.
Okay, pleasure.
Thanks a lot.